to The Hypnotist, the show that gives you inside access to cutting-edge hypnosis with real clients facing genuine issues. Brought to you by the hypnotherapist demanded by celebrities, CEOs, and even royalty, Adam Cox. These recordings took place live from Adam's clinic in London's world-famous Harley Street. So, get yourself comfortable and enjoy today's episode of The Hypnotist.
Take a deep breath in, and as you breathe in a feeling of calm and resourcefulness, and as you exhale, just allow any stress and tension to leave your body, taking you deeper and deeper relaxed. That's right. If your eyelids aren't already closed, close them now, and continue to breathe in a feeling of calm and resourcefulness, and as you exhale, just continue to allow any tension, any stress to leave your body in your outward breath, taking you deeper and deeper relaxed. And I want you to imagine that you can see the image of a very expensive watch. Maybe this watch is worth tens of thousands. And I want you to imagine that you can see the face of the watch, and in particular, the second hand ticking. As you see the second hand ticking round, I want you to fix your eyes on that second hand. And you might be aware in your peripheral vision of the color, perhaps even the material of the bracelet of the watch, perhaps even the logo there on the face. Maybe you can even see what time it is, but mainly I want you to fix your attention on the second hand and notice as it goes round clockwise, you can see the movement of the second hand, moving every second, and continue to allow your body to breathe in and breathe out. And notice that as the second hand goes round the face of the watch, it almost feels that you're going deeper and deeper relaxed. Continue to look at the second hand going round. You may be able to hear it ticking, that second hand movement, or perhaps not. It's not important. Just know that as the second hand goes round, you go deeper and deeper relaxed. And I want you to imagine what it would be like as you get lost in the watch, and imagine that the hour hand starts going around faster and faster, representing you traveling forwards in time. And as that happens, I want you to imagine vividly the image of a self-made millionaire that perhaps you know. You may know them personally, or you may know of their reputation. But it's crucial that as you think about this person, I want you to think of a self-made millionaire that certainly didn't create their wealth through family backing. It was something that they created through their own decisions, their own action, their own effort. And it may be someone famous, but it doesn't have to be. It could be someone that you know. But I want you to imagine them in the future, perhaps 10, 20, 30 years in the future. And I want you to imagine that not only were they a self-made millionaire, but they continued to increase their wealth as they got older. And I want you to see them perhaps in their 60s, 70s, or even 80s. See them towards the latter part of their life. And it doesn't have to be someone specific, but it helps if you can think of a specific self-made millionaire. And I want you to imagine that they are in their home and that you are able to see them almost like a fly on the wall, almost like a flying camera. You can follow them around and just see them in their home, seeing the wealth that they've accumulated, seeing how they spend their leisure time. Do they watch movies in their own private cinema? Do they take a dip in their own swimming pool? Do they enjoy playing tennis in their own tennis courts? Do they drive around in one of their many sports cars? Or do you see them studying in the library, continuing to learn? I want you to imagine that you see them in a place where they feel comfortable. And I want you to accept that this is someone that didn't start with something. They created the wealth during their own lifetime. This is someone that is perhaps a multimillionaire. And I want you to imagine that you are visiting them, not on their deathbed, but towards the last decade of their life. Still young enough to enjoy what they've accumulated, but certainly not at the beginning of their journey. And I want you to imagine that they are now sat down somewhere and you are able to observe them. Notice how they breathe. Notice their facial expressions. Notice their body language. And I want you to imagine that you can see them daydreaming. And they are daydreaming in a nostalgic way, thinking about their past, reflecting on what it is that they did to create their wealth. And at that point where you see them in that state of reverie, that daydream state, I want you to imagine that you are climbing inside their body, that you are able to inhabit them, and you are able to access that daydream state as if you were them, thinking about perhaps early on in your life. And I want you to think about how all this wealth was created. And I'd like to suggest that someone doesn't become a millionaire once. I'd like to suggest that becoming a millionaire takes place in many different ways, in many different times. And you are inhabiting the body of someone that became a millionaire. But at which point did they officially become a millionaire? According to financial analysts, these wealth trackers, they would say the point at which someone technically becomes a millionaire is the point at which, when their assets, less their liabilities, exceed 1 million, then they are technically a millionaire. But I'd like to suggest that that is simply the echo of an earlier voice. As you're in this body thinking back, I want you to think before that time, before technically you were a millionaire. I want you to think back from within this body to the very first idea that led to the chain of events that then created these many millions. Now, you don't have to know for sure when this happened. Just know that it was way before they actually became a millionaire, is when they had the idea. And I want you to imagine that you're drifting back in time, in their memory, in their nostalgic state of reverie, to the very point where they remember having that idea. And I want you to entertain an idea about ideas, and that is that everybody has ideas all the time. Many people will see incredible inventions and then recall how they thought of something very similar. Ideas are abundant, perhaps even infinite. But I want you to recall, as this person thinks back to their idea, something about it was different. They had the idea, that spark of inspiration, that glimmer of creativity. And yet, they decided to do more than just have the idea. They decided to incubate and keep thinking, nurturing that idea. And I'd like to suggest that a really good idea is almost like planting a seed. In and of itself, nothing happens. But if that seed is watered, nurtured, it can grow into something so much bigger. And back then, when within this person's life they had that idea, I want you to locate where in the body that spark of inspiration, that feeling of creativity exists. And I want you to consider that creativity, inspiration, exists in every person. I want you to entertain the idea that sometimes many ideas are considered, but not all are implemented. The truly great people that really develop and cultivate ideas are constantly thinking of ideas. But they just listen to their intuition for those ideas that they feel may have something to them. I want you to imagine that that watch that you saw on the second hand comes to mind again, and you can imagine that hour hand just going faster and faster, and imagine that you're going forwards in time, perhaps a few months or a few years, to the point at which a decision was made linked to the earlier idea, because it's impossible to follow up on an idea and implement an idea for an idea that you never had. And you are now at the point in this person's life where they decided to do more with that idea. They decided to implement some form of action linked to that idea. And I want you to tap into that feeling of decisiveness, courage, perhaps even determination, knowing that the implementation of an idea wouldn't be easy, but it may lead to great success. I want you to locate where in your body you feel this decisiveness, this sense of courage, determination, and resilience. And I want you to imagine that that also exists in you, and you can cultivate that and grow that. Imagine it expanding, growing, amplifying now. That's right. And then I want you to imagine that second hand in that watch getting faster and faster, in the hours going faster and faster, and now you're drifting into the future. The point where, as a result of that idea, which was then implemented, cash and cash flow accumulated to the extent that assets were acquired. Now, I don't know if these assets were other businesses or property or land or stocks or shares or some currency, but I want you to imagine that in order to become truly wealthy, cash flow was generated from a decision made from an idea, and that income was then reinvested to accumulate assets that perhaps also generate cash flow or appreciate in value. But when acquiring any asset, whether it's investments, property, or perhaps other business ventures, I want you to acknowledge that within this person whose body you inhabit right now, there is a feeling of risk. And the key to balancing risk is doing research, evaluation, due diligence. That thoroughness, I want you to imagine, exists within you right now. Because sometimes decisions are made, and they're not always the best decisions. But those that are truly wealthy tend to not be afraid of taking risks, and more importantly, they have an ability to learn from mistakes and setbacks. And I want you to acknowledge that those qualities also exist in you. The true failure isn't someone that takes a risk and then fails. It's someone that never, ever takes any risks and then fails throughout their entire life. I want you to get a sense that assets are accumulated and can compound over time. And I want you to imagine that that's what happens as you see that image of the expensive watch. See the second hand and then the hours spinning faster into the future. And now perhaps you're a few months, a few years into the future in the same body, but again further on. And this is the point at which assets less liabilities exceed 1 million. This is the technical point at which this person became a millionaire. And yet often, the very moment that someone becomes a millionaire, it's an underwhelming moment because there is no action linked to it. It's not like these lottery winners or gamblers that win 1 million through luck. And there is a surge of adrenaline and excitement. For the average business builder, wealth creator, the point at which their assets, less liabilities, exceed 1 million is just an accounting consequence. The real excitement comes back in time when they had the initial idea, when they took action with that idea and made a decision, when they invested the effort to turn that decision into a pragmatic reality, when they encountered setbacks, difficulties, problems and solved them and continue to make progress, to generate income and cash flow and then reinvest that into something that can grow. You could say that someone that becomes a multimillionaire became a multimillionaire at many different times in their life. You could think of it that the very point where the idea was created, technically, that person was a millionaire, just hadn't realized it yet. Because if that idea hadn't have happened, they couldn't have made the decision to implement the idea, in which case they wouldn't have been a millionaire. And then further on in time, when they actually made the decision, you could argue that at the point where they made the decision, they were already a millionaire and simply hadn't realized it, purely because that chain of events that came from making that decision created a future in advance, a destiny that was leading them to become a millionaire, and they didn't realize at the time. It's only in hindsight, someone in their twilight years thinking back, that it would have been impossible for them to be a millionaire had it not been for that idea and then that decision and then the subsequent effort and decisions that followed. I want you to get a sense that someone is a millionaire before they realize they are a millionaire. And it starts with the idea, followed by the decision, followed by the tenacious, determined action to turn an idea into reality. This point at which assets exceed liabilities by 1 million may feel good if the goal was always to technically be a millionaire. But the emotion will always be linked to creating the ideas, the value, making the big decisions, not the consequence of simply an asset appreciating in value. I want you to imagine that you can see that hand of the clock spinning round, the watch getting faster and faster, and now you're in perhaps a few years in the future where it is no longer the case where you are a paper millionaire. I want you to imagine that you are now a liquid millionaire, that you have sufficient liquid assets that could be either in cash or rapidly turned into cash that exceed 1 million. And perhaps this is the final point in the timeline where it's a different status of millionaire. Many people can simply own a property, and through time, when that property increases in value, it may reach a point where the mortgage is so low and the value of the property is so high that technically they are a millionaire. But that doesn't mean that they can spend lavishly, because that equity is where the wealth is created. There is a difference between being a paper millionaire, where technically assets exceed liabilities by $1 million, and at the point where you have liquid assets of over $1 million. And I want you to imagine that you are in the body of the person at that point in history where they have liquid assets of more than $1 million. And I want you to get a sense of how this feels different. That it feels at this point that they have that opportunity to make decisions about their lifestyle, decisions about businesses, acquisitions, choices that they can make through the freedom of choice that comes from being a liquid millionaire. Tap into that feeling and know that that feeling is also an avenue, an opportunity, a destiny available for you. And then finally, let's visit the future. The future at which this person genuinely felt wealthy. And you might be surprised that it isn't necessarily based on the amount of money in the bank or assets that they have acquired. It may have reached the point where they simply have been able to delegate all those things that they no longer want to do to other people, and have the time and the freedom to pursue those things that are really important. It's been said that for the first 10 years, Bill Gates, when he was in Microsoft, didn't take a holiday. He was incredibly wealthy. But was that true wealth at that point in time? If the freedoms available to other people are not available to you? It's been said that if you have a business that is entirely reliant on you, you don't have a business. You simply have a job that you can't quit. And I want you to feel what it feels like to feel wealthy within this person's lifetime, this person's experience. Feel how good it feels and know what that feeling of wealth means for you. Is it freedom? Is it choice? Is it the ability to live in a certain style or way? Tap into that feeling and acknowledge that this person's great wealth would have been impossible were it not for the ideas, decisions, and actions long before they were technically a millionaire. Many people are already on the path to becoming a multimillionaire and don't even realize that they are on course. Some people change course or give up while they are already on the right path, simply because the grass looks greener on the other side, without them realizing that they are already building the foundations for what is necessary to create great wealth. I want you to fast forward back into that person there that is no longer daydreaming about those nostalgic memories of how they created their great wealth. They are now in their body, feeling appreciative, grateful of what they have accumulated, but also the experiences that pathway gave them. It wasn't about the money. The money was a side effect of them pursuing an idea, perhaps building a business, creating or acquiring assets. It was who they became on the journey that really gave them the true value. The financial trappings are simply a way of keeping score in the world of business or investing. It gives them nice things, a quality of life, but the true things that they might treasure are who they've become in the process and the memories of the journey while they were on the journey. And as they look down at their watch, you notice that this watch that you were imagining all the time is the watch that they have on their wrist. As you see the second hand ticking round, I want you to imagine that you are now back in your body, listening to my voice, thinking about perhaps what ideas you have already had that could enable you to become a millionaire or multimillionaire, or could have in the future. But that ideas are worthless unless they are acted on. And in order to act on those ideas, you need to filter out which ones are valuable and which ones aren't. You are unlocking the ability to do good due diligence, quality research, and unlocking the courage to take risks, calculated, educated risks that create the possibility of future financial success. The fun and the adrenaline and the excitement are not when an accountant tells you that you are a paper millionaire. It is in the beginning stages where you are risking things to turn an idea into reality. You are unlocking all of those resources within you right now, and your creative mind will continue to give you a stream of ideas. And you only need one of those ideas that, if acted on, could create huge value and create a chain of events that will enable you to be a multimillionaire in the future. In a few moments' time, I will count from 1 to 10 to awaken you. You will awaken with a feeling of resourcefulness, optimism, creativity, courage, determination, and self-belief, and will be looking forward to either thinking about which ideas you've already come up with will lead to your great wealth, or looking forward to that incredible idea that you will be willing to act on. Starting to count to awaken you. 1, 2, 3, waking up. 4, 5, 6, more alert. 7, 8, open your eyes, open your eyes. 9, 10, wide awake, wide awake, wide awake.